Welcome to the LA Business Podcast, your destination to hear stories of how businesses grow and scale. I'm Robert Brill, CEO of Brill Media and the host of this podcast. Now, let's jump right into this week's interview. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the LA Business Podcast. Today our guest is Doug Brown, CEO of Business Success Factors and Sales Revenue Growth Expert. Doug is a nationally recognized revenue growth expert and former president of sales and training at Chet, Holmes, and Tony Robbins companies. And he helps companies optimize their sales process and increase their sales by over 850%. Doug, thanks for being with us today. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this. It seems like a very specialized craft that you do here. Tell us how you got into this.
Well, thanks for having me on, Robert. And I guess it's a specialized class, but I got into it by accident, quite frankly. My father had a business, and we all those boys worked for him. I started working for him at the age of 3, but all the sons worked for the family business. And quite frankly, my father had a heart attack when I was 16 and a half, and I had to run his company. And so what I started learning really quickly was, okay, it's not just about showing up to work every single day and just, doing my job. There's a lot more to this. And so what I did over his stay at the hospital and, in recovery period is I started looking at his business and I started saying, okay, how do we make more money here? And so I would look through all the inventory and I would figure out, what's there. I would figure out what our sales teams were doing. And I would say, okay, we could probably improve that. I looked at, we're not getting enough referrals, let's say. So I started going in and optimizing that. And then I've just kind of done that from company to company, whether it's the companies I've grown myself or companies that I've represented or companies that I've, been hired to help them.
That's fascinating. So you've been doing this since you were a kid out of necessity. So tell us about your time with Tony Robbins and whatnot.
Well, it was great. I mean, to work with Tony is a privilege. I worked with him, then I worked with a man named Chet Holmes as well, and they decided to form a business together. And I started out originally as a coach because I had sales experience and I had experience as a business owner. They were doing business-to-business coaching. So I started out there. I quickly became their number one producing coach. And then I sort of moved into different ranks. I took over the sales division, the presenters division. I co-ran coaching, or at least did the training for coaching, helped them develop their consulting programs. It was great. I learned a lot from Tony. He's a very smart guy. Chet Holmes is an extremely smart guy as well. It was definitely a pleasure and a privilege to be there.
And so now you're in for the last almost 9 years, Business Success Factors is your company, correct?
That is correct.
And how do you help clients? How do you help businesses grow? Like, what are the kind of the things that you're working on day to day to make an impact on business opportunities?
Well, I work primarily with CEOs who, in their heart, know that they should be doing better in some regards, right? So, in other words, they should be selling more, or they should be selling more efficiently, or they're a little frustrated with the current revenue growth and/or their current maybe even sales team. And so, what I do is I'm the outside eyes that look in objectively and say, okay, this is what's really happening in the company. And then once we figure out what that baseline is of what's really happening in the company, then we apply different methodologies, assessments, different things to really make sure that we understand the truth and the science behind what's going on. And from there, I help them create growth plans and initiate those growth plans.
Do you, so, I'm the CEO of my company. I founded it. There's what I found over the course of the now 8 years of operating this business is that the job of the CEO, if you're the founder, changes dramatically over the course of anywhere between 6 and 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, and I'm not sure do you work with CEO founders or do you work with like executive CEOs who will jump in who are not the founder of the company? Tell me about that.
All of the above. I work with the business owners. Because a lot of times business owners don't look at themselves as CEOs of companies. They might be running a $40 or $50 million company, that they started from the ground level up and they like to be called a business owner. They're not really looking at that. Then I work with CEOs of corporations, as well as the executive teams within corporations. So I do all three.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's as a job changes every 6 to 9 months, what I've as a CEO founder, what I've found is that, you know, sometimes there are better people to run the company than the founder of the company. Do you come across that?
All the time. I mean, sometimes the challenges literally are the leadership at the top. And there are people that have proactively recognized this. I mean, I would take, Google, for example, Sergio and Brin, right? I mean, when they got their company up to a certain level, I think it was 80 to $100 million, they know right then and there they needed to hire in a different level of expertise to grow beyond that. So, it really depends whether or not the founder of the company is that startup that, there are some people that are very skilled at starting 0 to, 10, 20 million. And then from there, it requires more structure in the company. And sometimes they're not that type of person that wants to put that structure into the company. So sometimes it's a necessity to find other people to run the company. And by the way, it's a really good trait of a CEO. That CEO should be from day one looking to replace themselves in some capacity in case something happens to them.
When you think about how a CEO operates, what are those breakdowns of kind of like financial levels that a CEO might be considering looking at in terms of when your knowledge or expertise has run its course?
I think there's a lot of different factors, but I mean, certainly a CEO's job is about profitability.
Mm-hmm.
So if the CEO gets to a place where they can't increase profitability or can't increase revenues and profitability, then it's time to talk to somebody else. Sometimes CEOs just lose interest too, or the company grows beyond where they even expected it to grow in the first place. I've got a couple of very good friends. I mean, they started out from 0, went to 500 million. They weren't expecting to be at 500 million. I've got another guy that's a friend of mine that, went from 0 to 20 million. He already told me, hey, listen, I think I can get this to 60. And once I'm at 60, I think somebody else is going to have to come in. Right. So it really depends on where the business is and what the business is doing. But I think the number one thing that leaders ought to look and say, okay, am I still leading or am I now managing? And if you're managing and not growing, it's time to figure something else out.
How do you look at leadership? What's the distinguishing factor or set of factors there between leadership and managing?
Well, leaders lead, managers manage, right? So
Okay.
it's kind of like
How do you know? How do I know as a CEO if I'm leading or I'm managing?
Well, I'll give you an example. When I used to run things for Tony, right? For example, I was the number one sales producer in the company. And when I was managing everybody, I was still the number one sales producer in the company because I always looked at it as I'm building a business for them and with them, right? And so a leader will constantly do this. The leader is looking for, how do we expand this company? How do we do this? How am I actively going to get involved? How am I going to inspire people to actually follow what I'm doing? Yeah, a manager will get in there and say, okay, this is my goal for this quarter, and I've got to hit this. And so how do I help my people to accomplish that goal? But the leader's looking at the overall vision. How do I develop people? How do I, inspire them? How do I move them? How do I grow the company in the next levels? How do I get more exposure for the company? It's a much different role than just a manager within. And you need both in a company, right? And you can have both in the personality, but the CEO really is the driver of the company in most cases and should be.
That's fascinating. I think one of the challenges we've had in our company is really the opportunity to set up process. There was a period of time when I didn't even realize we need process.
Right.
I had surpassed what I'd known how to do because this is the second time I built this type of company. The first time it was for an agency that I had already that I'd been working for, and we got to the point where we realized we needed a process. But the 6-month period to get us to that point was extremely painful. And
Yep.
once we figured out we needed process, I finally, over the next 6 months, found the right person to give us that process. how important? Tell us about your work with process and CEOs. Do you come across companies who don't have a great process? I imagine with bigger companies, they might have good process, right?
Well, you would think, right? But see, what happens is these bigger companies get bigger, and then they have divisions that are also big.
Hmm.
And so what ends up happening is in the divisions start acting like smaller units, and they're not connected with the rest of the company in a lot of cases. I worked with a major television network. I can't name their name because everybody would know it.
Of course.
But I worked with a major player there, and they had a division which was like PBS, like public broadcasting service, and their sales were tanking. Their advertising sales, they just couldn't bring the money in. And so upon investigation, I found out their salespeople weren't even doing what they were supposed to do, and the managers weren't managing them, right? So once I started talking to the president of the company, we started fixing that stuff. But the process is extremely important for a multitude of reasons. But one of the reasons is because if you have a process, you know what to measure and what to measure against.
Right.
So, a lot of people think, well, geez, I can grow a company. And this is one of the reasons that I implore people to do assessments on their company first, because a lot of companies, they just want to grow. But really, what is the problem? And more importantly, what is the cause that's causing that problem? If you don't understand that first, and that's why process is so important, because we can look at a set of or subset of what, let's just take sales, for example, and just simple metrics like, okay, we're producing this many leads. What's the time to contact? What's the time to first appointment? What's the first appointment to the next appointment? And so on and so on and so on. And if there's a process there, people will follow it, especially in sales. Most of the people in sales will follow it. And then you can measure objectively, truthfully measure, not just like, I have a gut feeling that this is going to work.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I'm hearing is like just review the underlying assumptions that you think are happening in your company. Right. To your point about the public network, the PBS thing that was happening there, that the salespeople weren't actually doing the work that they should have been doing, and simply someone going in and reviewing the day-to-day work was enough to identify that there was some problem in what they were doing, and simply by course correcting, I presume that made a big impact in future quarters. Is that kind of
Yeah, it was. And in the case of that company, it was, look, we've been selling this way offline forever.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the time where the internet was just starting to gain traction.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't understand the online component of prospecting.
Right.
And so they were losing ground, and they didn't know what to do. And, they had salespeople there were there for 40 years. Prior to even the internet being opened up to our, knowledge of what it was.
So I've experienced that. I've been on the other side of that, right? We're a media buying company, and one of the things we do is, I've been in the business since 2003, and I've seen the ascent of MySpace and the decline of MySpace in favor of Facebook, right, pulling those reports for our clients. And I remember talking to salespeople anywhere between 2008, 2012, that 4-year period. And they were so scared, so scared of the programmatic, the digital advertising changes that were happening in the marketplace. And some of them just ducked their head into the sand, and they no longer work in advertising. At what point do you say it's time, like in that particular, you don't have to tell me that particular circumstance, but at what point do you say, look, let's reinvest in our people because they know our business, versus let's find new people, new blood? When is it time to cut bait? Really is what my question is.
There's a few factors there, but the first is, are they trainable? Right. So one of the things we first do is we assess, where are they? Is it the company that's causing the issue, or is it the salesperson or the sales management? What is the cause? Because you don't solve problems by fixing a problem. You solve problems by removing the cause. Therefore, you no longer have a problem. So in many cases, it could be the salesperson themselves has run the game, and that's it, right? In some cases, it is the process. I mean, I've been in companies. I remember I sold 5 major accounts one time in a company, and the operations process was to do things manually, and somebody dropped all 5 orders behind the fax machine, and they didn't find them for 30 days, right? So
that's horrendous. Holy cow.
Oh yeah, I mean,
So
for me, it was awful.
at that point, do you like demand that everything gets digitized?
Well, at that point, I threw a nutty because I was the rep, right? So the and but I mean, it could be anything in the process. What I'm saying, Rob, it could be the fact that we have, like, I'll give you a simple example. It's a chain of stores. I just went there. It's a music company, and I went there to just. I've decided, hey, I'm going back into music because I used to play music. And so I call up, I go to this and I say, hey, I'm looking to do this. I want to buy a flute. I figured I'd like to try to play flute, right? I've never played flute before. And so I'm looking online, they're like $1,000, $2,000. I'm like, okay, that's in the budget. So, to start out on a flute. So I call the store, I talk to the manager. The manager says, okay, good. I'll look up stuff and I'll get back to you. Okay. And so that day goes by, nothing. So yesterday I drive to the store because I'm near it. I go in, I'm like, I never heard back. And so the person I'm talking with is saying, hey, you know what? This person's not in today. So call this person tomorrow.
Right.
Right. And I'm sitting in my head going, I'm telling you, I want to buy a flute right here. I'm in your store.
Right. I've got $1,000 and $2,000 burning a hole in my wallet.
And all you have to do is pull this thing out of there and say, this is the one you want. And I would have bought that flute. So I call back today and I talk to the manager and I say, hey, look, why didn't you call me back? Oh, I'm sorry. I got busy that day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So we have lack of follow-up. Totally. We have lack of training. We have lack of consistency, and we have lack of communication within that one company. How many flute sales or guitar sales or whatever are they dropping per week? Right.
A similar story. I went to the doctor. I'm not going to name the name of the company, but I went to the doctor, and I knew the doctor wouldn't be able to get back to me. She said I'll get back to you. Get a chest X-ray just to rule out all the horrible stuff that could be happening. I just have a cough, bronchitis, or whatever. And it doesn't. I'm not particularly surprised that the doctor didn't get back to me because I had to go to an imaging center, and they probably didn't get the information back to the doctor, and she left, etc. So I called the next day. I talked to a customer service woman, nice lady, and she was like, "Just call us back, ask for my name, and they'll transfer to me, and I'll continue the follow up." And I told her, I was like, I can virtually guarantee you the next person I talk to won't know who you are and will not know how to transfer you. And lo and behold, I called back 20, 30 minutes later to check on something to see if the fax had been sent or whatever. And the woman was like, I have no idea you can't transfer. So I was like, please tell this woman, write it in my notes that, they couldn't transfer as I thought it would be. You've got to, it's unfortunate because I really want to, as a consumer, I really want to be trustful of what people tell me. And I believe that people have the best intentions in mind. And I believe they're good people, but there's been just so many moments where the worst part of it comes out where they can't actually do what they say they're going to do. And that's how companies end up hurting themselves. And These are big companies. Our company is 16 to 18 people, depending on which day of the week you're talking about and when we hire people. But we can control and have good process and I think good customer service over 16 to 18 people. We get to 100 people, holy cow, that must be incredibly difficult. It requires a whole new set of process. I mean, what are some of the growing pains that you hear that you help companies with? How does a company scale from 16 to 18 people to 100 people? What are the stages that those go through?
That's a really good question. So the answer that I would give you would be this. It depends. It depends on the growth plan. So if we're going to go from 16 to 100 people, and let's say we want to go from, I don't know, 10 million to $50 million, there has to be a plan in place to do that, right? There's two ways to grow a company that I know of. It's to scale very quickly with chaos. And it's also to be a bit patient and put process in when you go through the process. It really depends on what the CEO wants to do. There's not a wrong or right way of doing this. I can tell you, I was part of growing a company. We were doing $63 million and we went from $63 million to $362 million in 2 years. I had a full head of hair back then.
Was that a particularly stressful ascension?
Extremely. So, it was chaotic and it was problematic. And, but when you have that type of growth, that's part of the expectation that might come along with that. Now, I've also been part of growing companies. We went one from 3 million to 27 million, and it was easy as could be. It was just consistent, compared to what I experienced before. So if you want to go, what I would say is, all right, if you're a 16 or 18 person company and you want to grow, let's get you to a 30 person company first. What's the plan for that? And we still want to look beyond that, but what's the plan from 30 to 50? And then what's the plan from 50 to 75? And then from 75 to 100? Because what you're going to find along the way are things that you didn't expect were going to come up, are going to come up. So you're going to end up dealing with some of the challenges that come up anyways, but it's a lot easier to do that when you have control and understanding of what the growth process should be.
Right. To solve the issue when you're at 30 people, not at 75 people.
Right. And that's, one of the biggest challenges companies have when they're scaling is they scale too fast, and I've seen companies implode themselves by scaling too fast. I had a client that they went from 48 million, when I got there. And I helped them, and they went from 48 to $110 million in 2 years. And so there was about a 1-year project with me. I got them up and doing their thing. They went from, 48 million. They were up to, 70, 80 million, whatever it was. I'd have to look at the exact number. And then they went from 110. Well, guess what? They had an 82% turnover rate of employees when I got there. So I fixed that problem, but then the CEO decided, hey, now this guy's not here anymore. I'm going to go back to my own way, old ways, right? It upended the company. And, cost of turnover, cost of customer service, as you were saying, with your call in particular with the medical thing, I can't imagine, the average is 12 people that a disgruntled person tells. Right. But, there are some people who just go crazy online and do all kinds of things, due to the fact of, not being treated well. So in this case, they started treating people poorly, weren't responding to people. The money issues were happening. And quite frankly, the federal government stepped in and said, hey, listen, you can't do this.
Do you ever tell a client, like, is there ever a situation where a client says, hey, I want to grow the business, and your response is actually, it's better it's not to grow the business?
Yes.
Temporarily. That's really interesting. Oh, temporarily. Okay. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I had a client, he was doing $4.7 million a year. And I knew there was an idea there that we could grow the company. And I said to him, I have this idea, but I'm reluctant to tell you, because if I tell you, you're the type of guy who will put this in play like tomorrow morning. And your operations department's not set up well to handle this, nor is your customer service department set up. But I think the idea will work. And I said, so why don't we structure things in place and then test the idea? And he said, sure, but tell me the idea today. And I said, well, I don't really want to, right? Because I have a feeling you're going to put it into play. He goes, no, I promise I won't do that. So okay. I told him the idea. 3 weeks later, he was an $8.7 million company. No, I'm sorry, $8.2 million company.
Are you serious? Right? In 3 weeks?
In 3 weeks. He added, he went from 4.7 million to 8.2 million. He wasn't returning my phone calls. He was just like all over the place. He was missing meetings. And so I'm like, what happened? So I called up, and they were a family business. They were a, company that you could actually talk to people. And so I talked to his daughters, and I'm like, what's going on? And they go, he's out of his mind. I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, this was a company that actually manufactured metal buildings. Right. Okay. It's like smaller metal buildings with, I don't know. Sales have been flooding in and. And the operations department's ready to quit. My customer service hates being here right now. This is so stressful. I don't even know if I want to stay here anymore. Right. So turns out, guess what he did?
Went to Vegas.
He implemented the idea that I told him to hold off for. Okay. And he got himself in such a stress point that the company actually got stuck there, and they've never grown beyond that. So
really,
yeah. And so, it's not a bad thing to grow and scale. We all want to do that, but let's get stable first. So, you
Mhm.
start, stability, scale, right? And then you can do it with sanity, or at least I would say a relatively good plan and action, and not just upend the apple cart, as it said, just to grab an apple.
When you when you're helping a company grow and scale, what are like the top 3 things that you're like over time, what are the trends that you looking at the trend of it, right? Like what are the types of things you're telling companies to do? Is it operations? Is it marketing? Is it staffing? Like what are the commonalities there?
It's one of the things consistently is aligning the marketing and sales departments. That seems to be a challenge. Marketers think salespeople, are salespeople. They're lazy and they get overpaid.
No.
Salespeople, no, I don't.
I'm a marketing person. I think salespeople are incredibly valuable.
I'm not saying all of them. I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
in general, right? And so, and salespeople think marketing it's kind of like, hey, they put some stuff out, but we really
Softball.
don't need them, right? Right. But when we can align that look, the customer journey is one process
Mhm.
all the way through. So when we can align marketing, sales, customer service, operations, everybody on the same, platform, what is it? The spirit of the same ranks, the old Sun Tzu thing, right? And when
Okay.
everybody's marching to the same drum,
Mhm.
things magically go along great for the client.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? That spawns referrals. That
Yeah.
lowers acquisition cost. So that's one of the first things that I look at. I look at the whole process and I say, what's going on within the process? Are they aligned?
Right.
Second thing I look at consistently is in the sales team itself, right?
Mhm.
Because one of the most frustrating things for CEOs that I talk with are, they can't get accurate sales forecast. So, the CEO, like yourself, got to plan budgets. How do you do that if your numbers aren't accurate coming through, right? If you overplan or underplan or whatever. So, one of the things that we look at is we look at the sales team and we say, okay, are they in the right spots? Are they in the right place? Are they the right personality? Do they actually have the sales DNA to accomplish this? Are they in a hunting role, but they're really not a hunter? They're a farmer?
Mm.
Or, are they in a management role? Like, one mistake that a lot of companies make, not always, but many times I see they take their top producing salesperson and they make them the manager.
Right.
Right. And so when you look at the DNA of a manager and the DNA of a salesperson, they're fundamentally different.
Mhm.
And so, a top producing salesperson might be that person who just loves to, communicate with people and go out, and they hate spreadsheets. They hate documentation. Really, a lot of them. But managers love that stuff, right? They love spreadsheets. They love looking at numbers. They love coaching. They love doing those things. So we look at the sales team as well. And then the third thing is what is the real goal? Like, what's the truthful goal? A lot of times, you ask people, what do you want to do in your company? And they go, oh, I'm a $30 million company. I want to get to 100 million. Do you really?
Right.
Like,
Why?
yeah, right.
For what reason?
Right. Because they think a lot of them think when they get to 100 million, they're going to have X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times they have ABC headaches and they don't
Right.
realize that. Right. So I know people who have taken their $200 million company and cut it down to 50 million and they're happy as can be.
Right.
So what is the real goal? So once the real goal is there, you align everybody on the same play, you assess it all, you figure out what's going on, you look at the sales team, you say, okay, are they actually able to do that? Like, maybe part of the game is, hey, we got to go hunt really big sales. And they just don't have the understanding of how to hunt big sales on a team approach, right? Or how do
I
we
know a
recruit
company
in
who's
those
doing
people?
that right now. I know there's a company that I know of who's going from a lot of hunting and gathering to like, I'm going to cultivate and farm massive clients. I
It's
don't
a
know how it's
different,
going to work, but I'm sure it's informed. They're a smart company.
I hope so. I mean, it's a different sell, it's a different sales process. Like,
Different sales, different executives. Yeah.
oh yeah. Cause you got to do peer-to-peer selling.
Yeah.
Right. So if a company comes in with, a salesperson or two salespeople and a sales manager comes into a company
Mm-hmm.
and they've got the CEO, CFO, HR, operations, IT sitting at the table, the first perception of that company looking at those three people is like, oh yeah, you got two salespeople and
Right.
one sales manager. So I might have one honest person on the other end of the table. That's how they're looking at it. Right. But if you brought your CEO in
Yeah.
and talk to the CEO and you had your CFO, because everybody talks a different language at that level. Your director IT has very different concerns and considerations than the HR person.
Totally.
So we have to sell to that whole platform of peer-to-peer selling all at one time.
That's really interesting. I had never thought about that.
That's one of the major keys in doing that type of sale, because when you're asking for $300 million sale, whatever it might be, in the case of what you were referring to, you better have a team. And by the way, sales cycles are longer and it's costly to do it. But if you do it right, it'll give you multiple growth.
Right. You need to have the money for the dry season, so that when it starts to rain, to get through the winter, basically, of the long sales cycle.
Yeah, because sometimes these companies take a year to make a decision, right? They just a clear legal, it might take 6 months. So
right.
It's one of these things, depending on who you're selling to, what level of peer-to-peer selling you can do. Now, if you're selling to medium-sized companies, and that, you're, let's say, a $2 million company and you want to sell to $50 million companies, which would be a big sale, then you need a smaller team, or you need a certain type of thing, versus if you're going to try to go sell, the top 50 companies in the world, right? It's going to be a different sell.
I find it's always, when we partner with like other agencies and whatnot, I'm always involved. Like, I think it's critical for our company that I am 100% involved in the very first part of that conversation until we get the first campaign off the ground. And then, we don't hire salespeople. We don't have salespeople on our organization. We have account managers, and these are people who are running the business after a new client comes on board. And so I think I understand the validity, at least from a smaller scale, how important it is to have the highest level people involved in forming a new relationship. I think it would be very difficult to have a big new client come in without having me being the CEO involved in that relationship.
In most cases, it's not going to happen, right? If they're a huge client, because they want somebody. Look, everybody, there's a professional ROI to every sale, and there's a personal ROI to every sale. And a lot of times people forget that you're not dealing with a CEO. Yeah, you name whatever title you want. You're dealing with a person,
a human. Yeah.
Right. And that person has wants, needs, desires, fears, baggage that came from the past, things they might be anxious of in the future. And if they can deal with somebody who understands that, and they can get them the professional ROI, hey, I want more money coming into the company, I want more new leads, whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah.
But they're also, let's say their personal is, I don't want to fail at this thing because I took investment money. So if I have investment money, I might get publicly thrown out of my own company, and therefore I'll be embarrassed in the industry. And therefore, when I go to get more money from another company down the line from my other companies, I'm not going to be able to get that because my reputation, right? And that might translate into my family life or whatever. Sure. All of this has to be taken into consideration and addressed in a sale.
That's fascinating. When you onboard new clients, what types of clients are you generally looking for? Like, how do you know when you're talking to your right potential client?
They're generally selling business to business. Usually I look at, somebody who has 10 or 15 salespeople. It depends on what I'm doing for them. So, 10 to 15 plus salespeople, usually they're doing somewhere around, a minimum of $15 million to $20 million. Not always. I've had companies that are doing $12 million that, generate $9 million in profit that,
good business,
not a bad deal. Right. So, it really depends on what they're doing and what they want me to do. Sometimes people just have me in as, an advisory role, right? Where it's like, listen, I'm looking to accomplish this. I really need an outside set of eyes who been there, done this. And, in that case, sometimes the companies can be, smaller, like that $4.7 million player, right? I mean, it was a cost affordable for them. And obviously they got an ROI. He did something I asked him not to do, but he got an ROI pretty quickly.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's traditionally what happens. And, and I'm looking for a company that generally is either frustrated where they are and they want to grow, they know something's there. They either know what it is,
Hmm.
or they don't know what it is. And you and I were talking earlier, and you had mentioned about the solar company, and I have a client who's solar company, and they're looking to scale up to $100 million, and so they're going to be handled differently than a client who may want to grow from 25 million to 28 million, right? It's going to be a slightly different plan. And require different budgets. I mean, you're in marketing, you understand. Certainly, if a client says I want to grow, triple my revenue, and they have zero marketing budget to do it, it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. How, Doug, in the last minute or so that we have here, how can people find you?
They can go to my LinkedIn profile, which is Doug Brown 1234.
Okay.
And or businesssuccessfactors.com. I have a book out called Win-Win Selling: Unlocking the Power of Profitability by Resolving Objections. It's all about communication and psychology and philosophy of communication. They can get that at winwinsellingbook.com.
Okay.
Or they could just reach out to me directly at 603-595-0303, or email me at doug@businesssuccessfactors.com.
Awesome. Doug Brown, CEO of Business Success Factors. Thanks for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. I mean that too. So thanks for having me on.